Okay, so this tutorial is on VR locomotion and specifically connecting up the character actor. The actor selection in the toolbox, there's a character, and it moves around the world, hugging kind of the ground surface and even objects which it can stand on, and it even jumps. And I've connected the VR rig to it, the preset rig, so I still have this grab ability using the grip trigger on my right. I've removed the fly mechanic, which is by default on the preset, to the left index trigger, and I've connected the character controls. I've rebound the character controls for this actor character. I've rebound them to the thumb pad of my left hand. And so I'm using my left hand kind of pointed out in front of me, and I push left side to side, and forward and back. I move forward relative to the camera. And it works pretty nice. And I'm kind of moving around building this whatever gentle spiral staircase, and I can actually pick one up, and then I'm using the squeezing grip, the grip on my left, to jump up. And there's a natural certain size of step that I lost track in there. There's a natural size of the character that natural size of step that the character can do naturally. Like I can jump, but I will, if I get it just right, I will be able to go over a certain size step. There we go. Get my jump. Anyway, yeah, and you could kind of perfect this. But yeah, with a little care, you can. Whoops! I got myself stuck. Got the character kind of stuck. That's one thing to pay attention to, is that it does react to some of the physical dynamics of the space. So sometimes you will, when you're lifting objects with rigid bodies, you'll pin yourself into a strain scenario. So something to be slightly improved. But for the most part, this is actually a fairly enjoyable way to have an experience. I enjoy flying, but I totally understand that in general, in some cases, you're going to want a mechanic that's a little bit more sort of human realistic, and like an architectural walkthrough or something like that, and kind of restricting people to the ground plane and make them figure out how to get to travel upward. So anyway, I'll show you how to build this. Let me exit this show file, and we'll go to a new show. So the first thing you're going to do is bring in the actor. So you're going to do the actor character, and then what we're going to do is bring in the VR rig. That's the VR rig preset. And on the VR rig, on the preset, under the left-hand index trigger is fly, and we can go ahead and hit the minus button on that, or hit delete, and we'll get rid of the fly travel mechanic, because what we're going to do is, instead of flying, we're going to use our left hand to control the locomotion of this actor. So what we're going to do is have the VR rig be childed to the character, so that the VR rig is a child of the character, and it rests it. So to do that, what you're going to do is grab the words of VR rig, and you're going to drag them up and drop them on top of character. And then we're going to set the we want the X and the Z position, the horizontal parts of our VR rig's transform, to zero out and be set to the center of its parent, the character. So we'll come to we'll select the VR rig, and we'll come to the transform, and we're going to double click next to Z. You can either click here and hit 0, or if you double click this scrubber, it will There we go. Set Z to 0, set X to 0, and then leave Y in this position right here, -0.8. That's the offset from the sort of center of this. The character actor is at 0.8 because I think it stands at 1.6 meters, which I think is kind of average human height. It assumes that there's going to be a viewpoint up here when you run this around in kind of the two-dimensional screen version of this actor. But you want your VR rig node to be at on the sort of ground plane, whether it's the ground or whatever the ground relative is to you in VR. So like when I jumped and the ground became a new a box, the surface of a box, we want the idea of ground to be emanating from here. The position should be down here because this is this virtual point, the point that is the base of your VR rig, is where you have set calibrated your VR system to be both the center and like with respect left and right, but also the ground. Like when you lay your Vive headset on the ground, that's when you've calibrated where the ground surface is and where the little blue circle, kind of chaperone circle or whatever they call it, that lives on the ground plane. Right? So just zero out the X and the Z for the VR rig after you've childed it to the character. So you take the VR rig, child it to the character, zero out the X and the Z, and your VR rig's Y should remain at -0.8. Now we're going to actually get rid of this like pill capsule mesh, so that we're not actually we'll basically go invisible. And you could replace this, but to do that, you're going to go into Unit, you're going to double click the character, double click, and then in here under expand this rounded cylinder entity, you can hit the minus sign on. And now you're just seeing this rigid node, which is this sort of like aquafresh blue, which is invisible during present time. It's just representing the rigid body, the collider of this character. And this character has built into it a number of kind of inbuilt controls. And you're going to really actually want to toggle down acceleration from 75 to about, I think, 5 or less. You can play with it. Deceleration, I think, is fine, but if you kind of want to work the mechanics to, stop as soon as you let go of the controls, and there's no kind of deceleration lag, crank this up, and you'll notice the differences there. Top speed, I think, should really come down as well. And I'll put it at, even 1. And you'll want to play with that depending on how vast your scene is or something like that. And you can always change this. So you can imagine, okay, I want people to move really slowly when they get into a very detailed space. But if they go, once they venture out of that, you could use a trigger to tell, you could use a trigger that would basically change that value in something, left a space when the character left that space. So I'll turn down the top speed, maybe crank up the deceleration and down the acceleration, and good. So the last thing is in our VR, or the last two things basically is set up the controls. So the first step is in our HMD viewport. When we're selected in this viewport, we want to make sure that this character, the character is the viewport player node, which means that when we're looking through this viewport, the controls, all the control inputs are connecting into that character. Okay, so select the HMD viewport And while you're doing that in the hierarchy, right-click the character in the over here in the hierarchy, right-click it and hit Set Viewport Player Node. And you'll see character is set as the player node on the HMD camera viewport, and that's great. Which now means that the VR controls work, and then which is kind of the master level for that viewport. And then the player node inside of that is this actor, which has these kind of kinematics and motion controls built in. Okay, so then the last thing is under Edit, Preferences, Inputs. We're now going to, we see character controls at the top. And what we want to do is rebind move and jump. I don't think crouch is basically unimportant. Interact is unimportant. These are sort of residue from the 2D screen reality. And then rotate view as well. It doesn't apply because you're controlling your camera with your head. Whereas if you're doing this just on a screen, this requires like a mouse move. So on move, we're going to hit set. So we're going to rebind move. We can hit set. And now it's waiting for us to press an analog, which means a two-dimensional controller. So that's like the thumb pad on your Vive or your Oculus, or on any of your VR controllers. That thumb pad is an analog. And so that was right hand controller. I'm actually going to set it to left hand controller. So I'm going to hit set and pick up my other controller, and I'm just going to press any part of the thumb pad, and you'll see it says VR controller left thumbstick is the assigned input. Great. So that's when to move. It's going to take these values. Now for jump, I actually VR controller left hand grip. Oh, it's yeah. Well, I'll set it. Click the left hand grip, and we're good. Actually, I'm going to set it to the index trigger. Then I can still use the grip for interactions, like grabbing. All right, now I'm going to hit OK, and I'm going to test this out in VR. It should go stereoscopic here. Actually, let me put something in the world. So I'm going to put a cube out there. I'm going to put interactions on it. I'm going to put the interaction of grabbable fixed, and then I'll make its rigid body not movable, and then I'll clone it, and then I'll go into VR. Okay. So both controllers are tracking, and now the thumb pad on the left, I am indeed moving a little bit slower, but it's not bad. So it's a little too slow for me, so I'm going to come over to character, and I'm going to think here. I think it was my top speed could be a bit more. I'm not so concerned about acceleration, but we'll double the top speed, hit VR again, and you can also change the jump power or the jump speed, and you will get you'll be able to jump like hundreds of feet in the air. Okay, it's absolutely working, and I think it's just about adjusting speed. So you saw those controls, and you can kind of play with that. And now I've got this ability I can look around and face anywhere in my VR world, and no matter where I face, this left thumbstick always works relative to that camera, which is really nice. So it sort of takes the screen orientation of this camera and works the thumbsticks, which I think is feels fairly intuitive, and then you can still grab and interact with everything the way you would. And so yeah, I think thumbstick and thumbstick for move, and then index trigger on the left for jump is not bad. and probably you want your speed. You'll probably want your speed closer to 5. I think that's where I had it originally. It's a little more appropriate. Yeah, that's not bad. Maybe the acceleration could be better. But yeah, plenty to play with. And you can climb fairly good. Like it's got pretty good traction, I guess. And so, for example, if I build terrain, I build like a mountain up here, I should have pretty good ability to climb that. Let's see here. Up we go. Like the great sand dunes. There we are, to the peak. Turn around, look back. So that would be interesting here, as someone can figure out how do we dynamically toggle fly back on. So at this point we fly, but that would be easy enough. Fun way to do it. But I think this is a great mechanic, and hope it works out for everyone. Let's do a super quick review. The character comes into the space. The VR rig comes into the space. The VR rig, you're going to turn off or delete fly under the left index trigger. Again, this is the preset VR rig. Child the VR rig to the character. Zero out its X and its Z. In the VR rig, or in the HMD camera's viewport, set the character actor by right-clicking, set it as the viewport player node, and then under Edit, Preferences, Inputs, under Character Controls, rebind Move by pressing the VR thumbstick, and then rebind Jump by pressing the index or the grip or something on a VR controller. Since the preset uses the grips for interact, that's why I recommended doing the index. And of course, these need to be bound once you have to be in VR mode, so that Steam VR is running and your system is picking up those inputs, and it'll bind them. And then, of course, changing your character speeds and all of this, all of these properties will kind of tune your locomotion. Well, there you go.